Okay, we start. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the workshop, Novel Approach to Improve Disaster Resilience in Local Communities. My name is Yordan Dimitrov, and I will chair the workshop announced. The workshop is co-organized in the framework of ENVIRORISKS Conference and the Horizon 2020 project called Resilient Europe and Societies, Renovating Local Communities, in short, RESILOC. We are 16 partners from 7 EU countries, and the focus of this workshop will be what we are doing under this project. Of course, before starting with the agenda, I would like to express my gratitude to ENVIRORISKS conference organizers for kindly hosting our workshop. I know it is the first ENVIRORISKS conference, and I sincerely wish to organizers to turn this conference into a long-standing tradition and success. So thank you very much for having us with you. About RESILOC, just in one sentence before the presenters start. The project aims to increase the understanding of disaster resilience in local communities, to create tools to empower local actors to assess and increase the resilience of their communities, with the main goal to build abilities to resist, absorb, and accommodate to the effects of different hazards in a timely and efficient manner. The workshop is structured in 3 short presentations and then 2 more flexible and inclusive sessions, one with questions and answers and one with open discussion. Our main goal of this workshop is to get as much as feedback as possible on the issues of local communities' disaster resilience. This is what we're going to work in the next 2 years, and it is very important to hear feedback and the opinion of different participants in this workshop. So these are my introductory words, and now I would like to give the floor of our project coordinator, Karsten Uhing from Fraunhofer Institute in Germany, who will present the vision of RESILOC project, and we'll try to give you the perception of what we think about our work. So, Karsten, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Jordan. Thank you so much for setting up our participation in the workshop. I think it's well needed. Some of you may have already seen that we are currently having a partner community in Bulgaria as well. So the local context is very much treasured to us. So what I will do today is I'll just give you a brief introduction of the project with a specific focus on the partners, and then have a look at the RESILOC concept. Who are the users? What are the needs and the added values? And also give you an idea of the first achievements before we break into like specific concepts that we followed. All right, so as Jordan rightfully said, the specific focus goes well by the title of the project, whereafter we are led by the vision of a resilient Europe and society, for that matter, by innovating local communities, RESILOC, so to say. So it will be the local communities. In this case, we display our partner community, the community de Catania in Sicily. And the basic idea behind the project is that any community in Europe is somehow exposed to hazards, and that the community stakeholders have to prepare and respond to such hazards in order to prevent the impact on the members of the community. So RESILOC addresses this issue in two core components. One is the increasing the understanding of resilience, sort of on a local specific focus, and then of course create strategic tools to empower local actors to assess this resilience of their communities and identify actions to increase it. And I guess sort of the two components are bridged by the Horizon 2020 philosophy of the European Commission of moving from research to innovation. So why do communities actually need to think about resilience? Certainly, part of these activities is well covered in the communities by what we consider like classical risk management, which is true. But then, of course, something about risk, which is, I suppose, good, but not covering the whole picture. So, you could have it could be a specific risk to a hazard, but what is really interesting is the scenario that such hazardous conditions would create and how it would affect the local community as a whole. So I suppose following the science, there's clear evidence that the amount of hazards that communities are exposed to, particularly natural hazards, which blends in well with the ENVIRORISKS conference, are increasing. But the other thing that cannot possibly be denied in the communities is that they have turned into complex adaptive systems over the past decades, which are partially a result of social interactions where your actors can be conscious of their role and in the system and therefore adjust their behavior as well, sort of in interaction with each other. So that may be an advantage, but it might also be a very disadvantage if it comes to hazards impacting and causing disasters. So either way, the vulnerability to disaster of communities is rising. And what can answer that is, of course, an increase in resilience. So the way we looked at resilience at RESILOC is dissecting it in sort of different concepts and try to connect these concepts together as a holistic picture. So the classical formula looking at hazard scenarios, exposed values, and vulnerabilities will now, that's the aspiration, sort of added with the behavioral aspects within the community. And I suppose we will hear a little bit more about that from the presentation of Joe Cullen later on. So who are the partners in the project? We have 9 research and development organizations stretched all over Europe. There is 4 local disaster risk reduction organizations and emergency managers, management experts, sorry. There's 3 solid partner communities. And then, of course, developing a tool is one thing, but, it's not really of use unless validated. So we have 5 validation communities, which are stretched across Europe. There you'll see. So there's the municipality of Catania, community of Kanik, the very own Bulgarian Tetovo village, the city of Catania and the province of Vojtahaja. And you see that there's quite a diversity in culture, size, and type or intensity of hazards, which we assembled in the project. So I promised you to say something about the concept or the vision. I guess the focus is clear. It's the community as sort of a real environment that you observe. It's not your regular monitoring and evaluation, but it's a collection of data for whatever is interesting regarding the individual aspects of resilience. So this is where it starts. It could be natural disasters, but technically the tools as a vehicle are not limited to natural disasters. So the data that you store is then being strat-checked in like an inventory, like sort of a data lake. And then you build on a platform which connects this data with, connecting is in different dimensions, and offering later on an interface, sort of, including like the algorithm, sort of the semantics that are being touched on the platform will then sort of be displayed in some sort of a form. You provide an interface to the stakeholders, and then eventually the stakeholders will be able to use this data and make decisions which will have an effect on the community. So this could be physical, psychological, or whatever. It could just be the need for a training. So this is the RESILOC vision of basically collecting data, using this data, and then making it like a starting point for making decisions of the community stakeholders. More of that in later presentations. Who are the technical users of the solution? So we have three layers of users. The primary users are, of course, the community stakeholders, which are typical people who can make strategic decisions within the community, hence your administrative framework. So we're actually speaking of local authorities. There is a layer of actors, so to say, which is the emergency managers. They respond, so they're responsible to act along and sort of prevention and response measures, which are then obviously influenced by the strategic decisions made by the community that we saw on the bottom arrow before. And of course, there's the citizens, which are beneficiaries, but they also provide some input. They do not operate the tool, but yet ultimately they benefit from it. So, I mean, they would most likely act as human sensors by provision of social media, but they could also receive information about an app. One clear distinction we have to make when looking at communities, however, in RESILOC, is the difference between a local authority and a local community. So, as I said, the unity of analysis for our vulnerability and also for the as a primary user group will clearly be the local authority. So that is something that happens within administrative boundaries, could be a municipality, either way, a system of governance, so to say, where decisions can be made. The local community is more something like a life world community, where people are sort of living and serving or responsible for a particular small area, especially, I guess, of a country, so to say. So besides the geographical aspects, local communities may also share common values, interests, and needs. Either way, there will be a geographical reference. So we're looking at like a place-based community. But so I guess what we need to understand, what's the relationship between the two of them? So technically, a local community can be composed of more than one local authority, which is what we see in the picture right here. For instance, for our partner community in the community, the Gorizia. So we have the local administration, so the local authority of Gorizia. But then, of course, in case of a disaster, they would mobilize the functional community, which includes sort of the civil response, civil protection services of the neighboring Slovenian cross-border communities. So, you know, you have to look at it at large. At the same time, you know, a functional, sort of an administrative community could be composed of various smaller local authorities, sort of like the, you know, community, yeah. So while the users of the tool will be clearly the local authorities, so we'll be part of the research to find out if, you know, the algorithm that I spoke about could be of help to the users to better understand and address the influence on resilience that comes from the local communities, which exists more like in a life world context. And again, I think we'll hear a lot of interesting insights on that from Joe at a later stage. Right. So I suppose what needs are addressed. So if I can just provide that at a very high level. So the one thing we assessed in previous project phases is that local communities need to reduce the impact from disasters on their community, which is quite, you know, a resilient community would contribute to this. But this is, you know, I guess there's no holistic tool in the market to resilience assessments that and particularly not on the local community level. So this is one of the needs that are to be addressed. Of course, the description of resilience of their community, of a community, in a valid, objective, and reliable way. So somehow, I guess you need to create a starting point which describes the resilience in order to show some sort of an improvement at a later stage. And then, of course, so for the last point, it will be important to empower the communities to collect and analyze data needed to assess resilience in a quantitative and qualitative way. And for that, I think you need to use a consolidated layer of knowledge to assess resilience. And there's many things that fall into that. So it's a matter of connecting legacy systems with the algorithm and different concepts of resilience to come to that holistic idea. So, right. Okay. So this slide was animated. Apologize for that. And with that, I'll move to the added value of resilience. After which, we try to bring to the community stakeholders, the users, the idea to get an evidence-based starting point for developing the improvement strategies. So that's to have an option to assess their resilience and gain evidence-based starting point. And I mean, to really show where do we come from, where will we end up. Again, resilience is a complex concept that needs to be assessed in a holistic manner. So if one of the idea is to have a software tool that covers the different aspects of resilience, and then provide a community-specific resilience profile. So I mean that would be more just than just identifying the resources available to the community. It might actually well be that the added value would be in the description of an actual character of the community that might include a lack of awareness, information, training, or whatever immaterial things that can be addressed besides the big investment and be of benefit in the preparedness and recovery on their own way, in a very local way to increase resilience. And of course, one final point is to activate the resilience capacities. And for that, we use local resilience teams, which we will hear more about from Uberto later. And also there I think that as well addresses the idea of a local community rather than a local authority, to have representatives, actors from the community to form such teams. Right. So where did we end up? The latest project achievements. So we've went through, like you said, we developed the methodologies for the assessment of vulnerability and exposed values. There was a first analysis of behavioral aspects. We established the local teams, at least the first part of it. An inventory was designed to organize the data intake. And of course, we started the concept of the hypercube, which will include 7 dimensions of local resilience. That might well be the outcome that we wanted to share with the users over the interface. The following 2 presentations will then be from Joe Cullen on the first analysis of behavioral aspects, and later on, Uberto will guide us through the concept of the hypercube. And with that, I'd like to turn the word to, I guess, the facilitator, Yordan. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Karsten. Thank you for sharing with all us the main idea and the vision behind the RESILOC project. Before giving the floor to Joe, I would like to remind the participants and kindly ask them to put their questions in the YouTube stream. All these questions will be discussed later in the questions and answers session. So please don't be shy and post your questions. Now I give the floor to Joe Cullen from Tavistock Institute, who will present the understanding of resilience in societies and communities, which is the main focus of our project. Joe, the floor is yours.
Okay, I'm trying to get my PowerPoint up. Can you see the screen?
Not yet, Joe.
Can you see it now?
I cannot.
All right, so I'll try this again. Oh, it says we're having problems connecting to the network.
Well, I think we're good at time, so well, if you want, Joe, you can send the presentation by mail and I run it for you.
Can you see it at all now? No?
Not.
All right, let me send it to you now, and then you can run it. Okay.
Oh, it seems like it's on your own cloud already, so I'll take it from there.
All right.
Sorry, I don't find it there. Where was it uploaded? Just send it quickly, please, Joe.
All right. It's on its way.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the patience from the audience. Much appreciated.
I think it might be a Mac thing, you know.
So the mail should be there shortly. Haven't received it yet. It's probably a large file.
Would you like me to share it?
If you can, please.
Okay.
Thank you. Oh, now I have it. I can also share it now. Okay, so thank you everybody for the patience again. I will share the screen now. I believe you can see the screen.
Yes, marvelous.
Just a second. Okay, so now this should be on, right?
Yeah.
Joe, on your command, next slide, I will flip the slides for you.
All right, apologies to everybody that was for that technical hitch. This always seems to happen. All right, I'm Joe Cullen. I'm a social scientist, and I'm going to try to explain some of the complexities of the social scientific aspects of what we're trying to do in RESILOC. Next slide, please, Karsten. So just to situate this research in the RESILOC plan, as you may or may not have seen from Karsten's presentation, there are 4 phases to RESILOC. It starts off with studies, where we interrogate the landscape of resilience and its connections with risk and preparedness and all of those quite complex interactions. Hopefully we gain understandings about how resilience works. We feed that into a set of methods to capture it, particularly the indicators and proxies that will define resilience and capture it on the ground. The methods then feed into the two main software tools that RESILOC is developing, the inventory and the cloud platform. And then we test the tools in real trials in four areas on the ground. So I'm talking about the studies aspect, and could you just scroll through the slide, please, Karsten? So what we did was to try to analyze risk perception and how that's connected with resilience through four main activities: a review, a scoping review of how the landscape of resilience looks on the ground, a literature review, an extensive review of what the literature says, what the science says, an online survey, getting stakeholders' perceptions of how risk is perceived. And we also did some intensive case studies of disasters to see how resilience maps out in terms of real live examples of catastrophes. Next slide, please. So I'm going to do the key results. There are four main sets of results. First is the concept mapping. This is really important to us because the key to all of this is to understand the connection between vulnerability, the perception of risk, how that shapes people's preparedness in relation to an impending or unaware disaster, and how preparedness does or doesn't then feed into the resilience of individuals and communities. Can you scroll down, please? And that leads us to try to understand how communities behave. Most of the research evidence suggests that communities are really, really complex. They're non-linear. They don't actually operate in very straight lines. They operate in quite complex ways. The best way to understand how communities operate, particularly in a disaster situations, is to think of them as complex systems. That means that they tend to have a lot of self-organization. Their adaptation to previous disasters is dynamic. They don't follow in very neat linear lines. It always feeds back into the past, into people's collective memory, and so on. Next arrow down, please. So our definition of community resilience reflects some of these understandings about the fact that communities are very complex. They're not linear. They don't operate very straightforwardly, and we need to factor that into our understanding of how resilience operates. Scroll down, please. And the final component of the results was how can we then translate what we understand about how communities work into proxy measures. So measures that can capture the resilience, the risk perception of communities when we can't get direct indicators and assessment of how that happens. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start with the first batch of findings, and that is about concept mapping. This was absolutely crucial to our understanding of how resilience works. Resilience is really the connection between vulnerability, risk perception, and preparedness. And there's a missing bit in the middle of that I'm going to talk about later, which is actually how people adapt their behaviors to those conditions. As I said before, this relationship is very complex. That there's almost no common agreement on how it works, except that it's complex and it doesn't work in a very straightforward way. Context will always shape the relationship between vulnerability, risk, and preparedness and resilience. It will always shape it, and that means the understandings of how vulnerability works and how risk works depends on the context. It depends on the situation in which citizens find themselves, and it depends on how they interpret meaning of what risk is. This relationship, this complex relationship between vulnerability, risk, preparedness, and resilience is infused with emotion, with memory, with community interactions and relationships, and particularly the sense of place, the geographical and cultural location in which people operate. There is a link between previous experience of disasters and risk perception and future behavior, but it can be both positive and negative. So on the one hand, previous experience of disaster can help people prepare better but it can also lead to complacency. And so the positives and negative polarities are really difficult to describe. Next slide, please. Community behaviors. People tend to think of communities as operating as a single unit, but that can't be. The situation is way far from the truth. Communities work in very complex ways because communities are typically very diverse. There's no such thing as one community that operates with a single mindset and a single voice. Because of that, because of the diversity and complexity, the behaviors of people in communities are unpredictable. They don't go in straight lines. People tend to self-organize in disasters in pockets, in their own sub-communities within the community. Communities exhibit what we call dynamic adaptation. They use learning from previous experiences to adapt, but not in ways that are straightforward. Temporal and physical proximity is a significant predictor of risk and preparedness, but again, the relationship is not linear. It feeds back in loops, depending on the context and the situation. And another really important point to understand about how communities operate in a disaster situation is that even you can be the most prepared community on the planet, but this is of limited value if the system that's looking after you fails to engage properly and effectively with the community in a hazard situation. So the key to all this is human agency. It's how the people who actually work at the top level, who are responsible for the organization and management of disasters, how they link and relate to the people on the ground, that will shape resilience and the consequences of a disaster. Next slide, please. One of the things we know best about resilience in the research we've done is we don't know anything. So there's two nice quotations that illustrate this. From our own work, where we say that the relationship between risk perception, vulnerability, preparedness, and resilience is complex. It's contested. Everybody disagrees about it, and meanings and interpretations vary. While there is a link between these concepts, the link is neither clear nor linear. So, the research findings are as follows. There is a strong link between risk perception and preparedness for a disaster, but it's bidirectional. Perception can make people more or less vulnerable depending on the context. There is a link between previous experience of disasters and the perception of risk and how that relates to preparing for a disaster, but it's contested and it's infused with emotion rather than rational assessment. There's a link between trust, the amount of trust people put in their leaders, in the people who manage disasters, and risk perception and preparedness, but it's shaped by both previous experience and sense of community and local knowledge. Again, context is everything. And there is a link between the kind of profile, the cultural, social, economic characteristics of a community and perception of risk and preparedness. But again, it's actually a lot less than you think. Next slide, please. So I've tried to kind of illustrate this complexity in this diagram. So what it tells us about this crucial relationship between risk, vulnerability, preparedness, and then resilience is that the relationship is extremely complex. Why we can see a link between risk perception and the extent to which that shapes people's preparation behavior for disasters, it's bipolar. It's bidirectional. On the one hand, preparedness can increase vulnerability because people, as I said before, maybe get too complacent because they've experienced a previous catastrophe, or it increases vulnerability. The crucial link between risk perception and preparedness is adaptive behavior. It's how people use or don't use their risk, their perception of risk, and how they do or don't use their preparedness to change. What we know from the research is that actually it's commonly perceived that distal factors, i.e. things like sociocultural profile, the characteristics of a community, gender, ethnicity, social class, economic situation, and so on. It was always thought that these are the most important predictors of behavior in situations. But the research tells us that's not the case. In fact, what really counts in changing people's behavior to make them more resilient in catastrophe situations is the small things. It's about how they perceive their self-efficacy, their confidence in a disaster situation, the extent to which their peers and their role models and the people they attach value to, the extent to which they exhibit behaviors that they can relate to and model and copy. So it's the small things that happen on the ground rather than the structural characteristics of a community and its people that make all the difference in shaping the behaviors people adopt in response to a disaster. Next slide, please. So our working definition of community resilience goes something like this. Community resilience refers to the capacities of local communities that are complex systems. So it involves complex interactions and actions of local agencies, citizens, the surrounding built environment and the critical infrastructures that are in a community to mitigate, withstand and recover from the impacts of a disaster. As well, and this is crucial, as well as the community's capacity for adaptive behavior. Community resilience can be enhanced by the preparedness of its citizens, building on their knowledge and experience of previous disasters. Scroll down, please. But this knowledge and experience works both ways. It can be positive or negative. It can reduce resilience or it can enhance it. And the key thing is the extent to which any enhanced resilience, improved resilience, is beneficial before, during, or after a disaster depends crucially on human agency. And that is absolutely critical to our understanding of how this process operates. Next slide, please. So an example of what I mean by human agency is illustrated by this case study. And what we did, we used Lifefield analysis to do a case study of what actually happened in a real-life disaster. Can you scroll down? Lifefield analysis aims to capture the lived experience of communities. And what you often find when you try to understand how communities work in disasters is you get the top-down view, you get the view of the system, you get the view of the agencies responsible for managing responses to emergencies, you get the view of first responders, who are key actors in the process. You very rarely get the view of people on the ground. So what we did was analyze a particular disaster from the perspective of the lived experience of the people who actually operate within the life world. And the example is the Grenfell Tower, which happened in West London in 2017. It was a huge disaster. Over 90 people lost their lives. The implications and the repercussions of it are still going on now. The public inquiry on the causes of the disaster, who was responsible, is still going on 3 years later. Can you scroll, please? And the key findings, if you do an analysis of a disaster from the perspective of the people on the ground in the community, shows a number of very interesting findings. Firstly, the interaction between the environment and human agency, i.e. the system, the people responsible for managing disasters, is crucial in shaping risk, preparedness and resilience. And that interaction and the human agency aspect is defined by power relations. It's the relationship between the system and the community in terms of who has the power to put preparedness into action. In the Grenfell Tower case, we found that the responsible authorities had all of the power, but failed to reduce the risk. And they failed to support the community to prepare for a disaster, and they failed to support its resilience after the disaster had occurred. In the absence of responsibility from the authorities, the community actually self-organized to protect itself before, during, and after the disaster, but it wasn't enough. They were still trapped in their apartments, having been told by the authorities to stay indoors as the fire raged throughout. So we need to understand from this case that capturing the lived experience of the community, and particularly its relationship with the system, the power structures, is crucial in developing the RESILOC tools. And measuring the relationship and accountability between the system and community is also very crucial. Next slide, please. So that means that we have a problem with proxies. As I said earlier, proxies are the indicators that are supposed to measure resilience in communities in the absence of direct measures of what resilience looks like. Can you scroll down, please? So on the one hand, we would think that the best way to measure proxies in the RESILOC tool would be to collect data to determine citizens' previous experience, their awareness of risks, and what steps they've taken to prepare. Scroll down, please. Using a mixture of surveys, administrative data, and so on. Scroll down. But because the key determinants of preparedness and resilience seem to be local factors, such as self-esteem, such as the extent to which you interact with your neighbors, such as the extent to which you copy behaviors from your neighbors, these factors are much more powerful predictors, and these predictors are significantly determined by local context. So that gives us a real problem in trying to develop proxies to measure resilience. Next slide. So the next steps, it's obvious that we need to know more about this complex relationship between vulnerability, how that defines risk perception, how that links to resilience, and how that pans out in adaptive responses, behavioral responses to a disaster situation. From the research and the findings, I think that our definition of community resilience needs to be revised to account for this crucial, critical intervention of human agency, and particularly the relationship, the power relationship between the system and people on the ground. And our resilience dimensions, indicators and proxies need also to take account of this relationship. The key problem we have, and we're still struggling with it, is accounting for context and making the tools flexible enough to cross boundaries and adapt to the complexities of communities in context. Next slide. Final slide. So this is kind of my vision of what the tool may look like in the future. It's essentially a strategic mapping tool. It tells us on the ground what the profile of a particular community is in terms of its resilience structures, in terms of stuff like its infrastructure, its economic profile, its communication, its resources, its environment, and the governance. But what it doesn't do is tell us enough at the moment about how context will shape those key dimensions. So we need to do more work on how we can factor in these complexities of context and how the community works with the system, how we can reflect those in the tool. It's also obvious to me, I think, that the strategic mapping tool is of limited value unless we provide support tools to enable the community to use the knowledge it can generate from this mapping tool to support it better in disaster situations. And that means that I think we need at least 3 sets of additional tools. One is on governance, how you actually manage these power relationships. One is on community learning, how you get the community to understand how resilience operates, how you get it to understand how it can prepare for disasters. And you need community empowerment tools, how the community's position, perspective, its risks, its vulnerabilities can be better understood by those people who manage and control responses to disasters. That's pretty much it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe. Thank you for revealing our understanding and RESILOC understanding about the community resilience and its main fundamentals like risk perception, preparedness, vulnerability, adaptive behavior. So Now, before continuing, I would like also again to remind the participants, if they have questions, they can put them on the YouTube stream. And now I would like to introduce the next speaker, Uberto Delprato, the manager of IES Solutions and the RESILOC scientific coordinator. Uberto is, how to say, the heart and the soul of RESILOC project, and he will present many of the innovative strategies and the technologies which stay behind the RESILOC idea and the RESILOC project. So, Uberto, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Yordan. Thank you, everybody, for being here in our workshop, and thank you to the organizer for giving us the opportunity to introduce the project and to share our views on such an important subject as resilience. I'm going to share my screen on my presentation. Actually, I have two presentations in my agenda, so they are physically two separate presentations if somehow they will fall into each other. So the first one has the goal of describing our strategy on improving resilience. The ultimate goal of the project is to empower communities to become better at being resilient towards hazards and risks. So you have heard the general introduction and a very interesting approach on the, so to say, behavioral aspect of being resilient. Currently, I'm trying to give you a broader view on how it actually would work in the future. So you will see some animations now trying to synthesize how we intend resilience applied in communities. So we have an environment. This environment it has people living there. So this is a normal situation. Something happens, we have hazards that are always there. They may be natural, they can be man-made, they can be unexpected, but they create an impact in the community in different forms. Disruption of services, catastrophes, or even physical damage or loss of lives, whatever. In principle, the way we can try to analyze this impact is based on three basic concepts. The first one is the vulnerability of the community to some specific hazards. The exposed value, so what may be endangered or disrupted or lost because of the specific hazard becoming real, and the scenarios, how they evolve in time. All then combined are those who we need to know to analyze the risk that belongs to that specific community. You can easily understand that it's basically something which is peculiar to any communities. Forget about how large or how small it is. It could be also your house who has a specific risk in your analysis, and it be clearly demonstrated by having insurances on that. There are experts who can turn to do the work of analyzing the risk for your community or your region or whatever. What these people do usually is try to extract from the observation of your community, the people who live there, the natural risks, the infrastructure you have, calculate some specific, let's say, variables that we call either proxies or indicators. Mainly we need indicators, some to shows that indicate the level of resilience in our case, but it could be proxies, I mean something that replaces the indicators but shows anyway important, are used to build up the indicators, or indexes without a summary of indicators. Experts then collect everything and prepare a sort of analysis of resilience. Good. Once they have done the job, they present the results of the analysis to the stakeholders. We already have seen that communities can be seen as administrative communities or functional or whatever, let's say, local communities in terms of people sharing the same principles. Nevertheless, there is somebody who has to be informed about how the community is resilient against a specific risk. And typically they have to take decisions after that. Okay, this situation is what we normally happens. The project has the vision to implement a method for analyzing, assessing resilience. So we start again from the environment and something that may happen there. The combination of the environment and the hazards or the events that may happen are combined into something which is real. So I know I have a specific risk. I understand my environment. I can understand the impact of this event on my community. On the other side, I have my people. I have how they behave, how they are aware, how they are ready, robust, resilient, all this that Joe just presented about the robustness of a community against a specific risk, together with their way of being informed and be able to understand what's going on, which I synthesize in this picture with a computer and a smartphone. Definitely, we have a lot of ways of being connected to the world and to know about what's going on, even if it doesn't happen exactly where I live. I know about it. And then to create my own ability to resist and to be resilient. All these combined represent the errors that I mentioned before, the vulnerability of the environment on the one side, the impact on the other side, and the exposed value on the other side. All of them can be combined. We are combining them and trying to make them objective. We want to have something which is physically collectible. It is not just an opinion, it's just something that is an average feeling in the community. So it has to go into an inventory. That's our idea. So we have to collect this information in a way, collect them and put them in an organized database. So we can do further elaboration on that. This sort of elaboration of data sets are anyway arranged and planned by the expert. Fine. These experts then will combine them in a specific way, the RESILOC way. For doing that, he will use a platform. This strange kind of circle with dots that I presented here represents our vision of a multidimensional representation of resilience. You will see later on that the resilience is not that easy to represent, and we came up with our way of presenting resilience in an understandable way by the stakeholders. Let's keep this graphical sign as a reminder of what we intend with the platform and the results of the analysis of data. This looks like statistical observation. So we know the risks, we know the environment, we know the people, we know what they do. What happens during the dynamic part of the event, something that happens along the way. So we have sensors, so something that actually capture what's happening. Sensors may be something which is physically deployed by the project or not, but anyway, something that creates an objective picture of what's going on during an event. And you have the social media that somehow capture what the people do during the event. It's sort of a new kind of sensors. And it is not only related to how much they chat on Facebook, on Twitter, or what they do, is exactly where they are, where they go, where they gather together. There's a lot of information that can be collected using the social media, including their perception, the mood, the sentiment of their community, which is equally important. And all of those who have recently the chance to experience the impact of the COVID-19, you know that there's a lot of psychology included in that, the reaction or simply the abiding to the rules or whatever. There are some third parties that are able to provide additional data that could be existing sensors, existing collecting system from the local stakeholders or local emergency managers, whatever. They should have a chance to be included in our platform. And this is what we do. The three red arrows represent our way of being connected dynamically to the world. Once we have this in place, we can do some magic, number crunching or whatever, and create something that is understandable by the user, something like a multidimensional diagram or whatever. I will come to this in a minute, just to show that all of this, which is a huge amount of data you may understand, can be summarized in a more immediate way of understanding what's going on, and where we are, let's say, strong or weak. And in principle, strategically, that's why we are thinking about a strategic tool. We can improve if we know where we have to improve. So the stakeholder will benefit from this representation of reality, which is complex and dynamic, and they will get a simplified version, not because simplified means less valuable. It's simply more easily understandable. All the data will stay there for additional analysis. In addition to that, having this social media arrow coming from the citizen to the authority, there will be also another arrow just going back from RESILOC to the citizens, because during an emergency, it is possible to help the wise behavior of people, just giving them information or better information or simply guidelines or whatever. This kind of feedback to the citizens is always very important to improve the ability of a community to respond first and then to come back to normality during the aftermath of the event. So this is how we represent the reality into RESILOC. Let's go on now on the structure we have been doing so far. This yellow box, let's say, is what RESILOC is about, all the development we see. We basically start from the complexity of local communities, trying to collect from the communities data, hopefully layered, so that we can organize them to understand the risk, to input in these data layers information in the form of proxies or indicators. The difference between them is indicator is what I need, but maybe I cannot have directly, and they can be calculated using proxies that represent something which is similar or shows the indicator. So both are very much interlinked. All of them are then combined in resilience, which is the complex task I'm going to discuss now, and then to provide this simplified presentation to the stakeholders in the form of dimensions. The next slide, I will go down into the meaning of what we did for representing resilience. So the understanding of resilience means that first, have to have a way to collect data in a meaningful way. We are not reinventing a way of creating data. We basically are trying to build up a methodology for collecting them and classifying them. There's a huge amount of data available in every community. The point is that we are looking to the widest possible community, which is Europe, and it is not always the same approach in Europe. I would say the opposite. Normally, they are different from country to country, at least. So we try to identify a methodology empowering every single community everywhere in Europe, at least, to collect data in the same way so they can use the same algorithm and the same formulas and the same approach for assessing resilience. The second is to find a structure for understanding exactly how to classify this information and to extract the information we need for resilience. So it's a twofold exercise first to understand what data have to be collected and how they can be structured so that I can reuse them. It's not only collecting and reuse. So the first point is to understand the fundamentals, the bricks that form resilience. The second is to analyze them for the communities. So we need to create this inventory, make them accessible, and to see how much this representation actually reflects the community. I cannot say that I know all communities across Europe. I can understand what are the similarities between communities. Now, I know if I discuss with some communities in Sweden and some communities in the south of Spain, they will definitely have different hazards. We may have different understanding, but they don't have different problems. They always have the challenge to withstand and to come back after an emergency or a disaster. The concept of resilience is comparably new to others, and yet is quite a complex one. So basically, resilience is a concept which is very difficult, if not impossible, to measure. There's not a measure of resilience in terms of units of resilience. There is no formula which has been agreed to calculate, and I cannot use 3 factors and come up with a number of resilience. There's no unit, actually. And there is even know a way of comparing resilience in different communities. So how can we work with that? Even the definition is not exactly the same everywhere. In principle, we all agree, and is universally agreed, that resilience covers everything of a society that has to first mitigate the consequences of something, secondly, withstand the immediate consequences and recover from the impact. And it can be done in many different ways, not only to be robust enough, which is a good approach, but whatever is robust will crack sooner or later. It has to adapt to the new challenges or a new way the risks are implemented, and eventually to transform them just to become better and able to resist. There are so many slow processes going on across the world. You think about the climate change that requires the communities to adapt and transform. They cannot live the way they have lived so far. They have plenty of examples that I cannot tell you in this limited time. So what we analyze is that, okay, resilience is not absolute. Good. First, it's relative to a risk. So I cannot be resilient the same way to flood and to an earthquake. They are not the same kind of risk. So definitely I have to evaluate or assess my resilience of my community specifically for a risk. It is related to a specific time. So think about the seasonal risks. So it is not the same that something happens at night or at day or in winter or in summer. So a specific time is crucial for some resilience. And it's definitely specific to the location. So two communities apparently similar in different locations have different grade of resilience. So in principle, resilience is a function of the risk, time, and the location. On top of that, preparedness is key. So preparedness is part of resilience, but it's not measured in objective terms. Preparedness is, again, started the sort of behavioral aspect, the sort of a psychological aspect of a community. So let's focus on one specific scenario. Our capacity to be resilient is a complex function of many different parts. Okay, the risk itself, which can be somehow estimated in different terms. There are at least two approaches. The capacity of the community, because they have enough resources, those resources are available, they are capable, they have the money to launch any kind of measure. So there's a lot of description of the capacity of the community to do something. The perception of risk, which is important. If people is not aware of a risk, they will not be able to be prepared. And the social features, which goes to any different levels. It goes to the law system, to the current wealth of the society, to the stability of the government, the leadership, or whatever. All of them are combined. The best prepared community would fail if there are no leadership in case of an emergency. So all of this, we try to capture them in this concept of the hypercube that was already introduced. So the first is, okay, all of them have some way of having an impact on the calculation of resilience. And this multidimensional representation shows that everything is interconnected. It's not just one dimension that leads everywhere. Sometimes it's very important to have a lot of money because I need to buy something to resist. Or sometimes I just need to have more awareness campaigns launched, which are less expensive, but maybe more effective in some areas. So let's say, just say it is a complex, we try to represent it with this multidimensional approach. In principle, the picture that Karsten showed at the beginning is exactly what we are planning to do and we are currently doing. So we understand the community, we collect data into the inventory, we build, based on the inventory, the platform that I will describe later, and we inform the stakeholders on the feedback arrow will have an impact on their community. The strategy for us is better to better understand resilience first, and then to identify from that observation what to do next. In principle, we have worked in the first part of the project to say that, okay, we analyze the elements of resilience, what risk perception, the psychological study that touched on the surface by Joe in his presentation. That's much more than he said. The vulnerability and exposed value that are being collected by the communities, and every community may have a way of doing it, to combine all of them for the scenarios that have been identified in the community, to see if there is any other approaches worldwide that are usable for us, and then to create the inventory. With the inventory available to move to the hypercube, we identify the proxies indicators, dimensions, and again, the scenarios. All this was part of the first, let's say, year or life of this project, and you will see what is the vision and the application expected from this. The inventory is the first important element that was developed. The inventory is not just a database. It's not just putting data into a container. It's more than that. It has to represent and make easy the assessment that we're going to do later. So it is not just a pure collection of data sets provided by the users. It's also how to harmonize them, how to use the same way of describing things. Just think about the geographical issues, what kind of geographical system we're going to use. And we know there are many different across Europe, only for that. In principle, we want to represent resilience as a series of snapshots. So we have one run of assessment of resilience, and we take a snapshot of it. Okay, this is how resilience is today. And then we can make changes in resilience. But then what is a snapshot? A snapshot for us is the resilience assessed along the number of dimensions. I will now start referring to 7 dimensions, which are the number that we identified so far. It could be less, it could be more. We decided upon the 7, and we'll see what kind of 7 dimensions we have chosen. So we have the dimensions, and along the dimensions, any run on the data sets will provide an assessment. This is our snapshot. I take a snapshot of my community today against a risk of, let's say, an earthquake magnitude 5, and I have some values or some semi-quantity on dimensions, and I say, okay, this is my picture. Then I can run other things. What can I do? What I don't do, so on and so forth. All the dimensions are calculated based on the indicators. Indicator is something which is more understandable. We did not invent indicators. Everywhere there are indicators. When you want to understand something, you try to find what kind of indicator you have. The indicators that I need, for example, is the average capacity of a community to understand messages or to take some actions. All of this can be implemented in different ways. That is possibly to know the average age of the population, the education, the ratio of employment. All of this can be combined to indicators. My community is robust, strong, or whatever along a specific dimension. Indicators are calculated with proxies, which is the average of number of people, with a degree, or the number of people with a certain quality of quantity of money, or whatever, the average number of beds in hospitals available, this kind of proxies, because they are not indicators, but they are the basis of indicators. All these proxies and indicators, and they are combined, they can be taken more or less into account in a specific scenario. So in some cases, the availability of beds is very important, like, for example, in these times of COVID-19. In other cases, they are not as relevant as other, because you don't need to bring people into hospital, or you can come up with any other examples. Just to give a graphical representation, this is how we see the build-up of the resilience dimensions, starting from the proxies that can be measured and potentially weighted, and the indicators that can be calculated. In some cases, you already have indicators, but if not, they can be calculated from the measured proxies. we can create or assess the dimensions in a way that forgive me now for not giving you the way how they are calculated, but there are 2 or 3 different approaches we are currently assessing how to do it. But in principle, from a number of indicators, I can synthesize how good we are in one dimension or another. Once I have it, I can represent resilience for this sort of, that we called it here, high-level understanding of resilience, which is also useful to allow the stakeholders to take informed decisions. Okay, remember this picture here and this picture here. You should have, I hope I was able to tell you what are the strategic views that we have for improving resilience, to understand how it can be assessed in a specific community. What do we mean by community, by the way? And how we can build on this ability to capture the basics elements that form resilience, to build up on a view in dimensions and indicators that empower the stakeholder to take decisions. How to do it depends on the tools that we are going to develop, and is exactly the second presentation I have in store. So Yordan, you tell me if I continue with the second, if you want to make a short break for the people attending the session.
No, I think we can. I think we can continue with the second presentation. All the questions will be discussed in the Q&A session. So.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Do not forget, if you have questions, that to put down in the chat or whatever, so that we can collect them in the end and try to answer. And even to stimulate a discussion. This is a research project, so we are always open to feedbacks and to questions that can help us to improve our approach. So the second part connected to the strategies, the technologies, what we are going to implement actually to realize our strategy. So we already talk about the inventory, which is actually the bridge between the strategy and the tools. On the inventory, we build the platform, the nice spider diagram, and how we want to use it. So this presentation is more practical on how things can be implemented. So first question to answer is, okay, let's imagine we have a tool. When this RESILOC tool should be used? Okay, we want to use the tool in 2 specific phases of a disaster risk reduction cycle. I guess you are all familiar with that, so I don't enter into details, but basically it is a tool that will be useful to be better prepared. So definitely it touches on the preparedness and very much stretches across the preparedness towards the response phase. It is not a tactical tool. We will not use RESILOC to tell the firefighters where to go or the first responder what to do. We will create a better environment for them to work. We will give them the ability to know better the community they are going to work with or work around. So in principle, the platform is the strategic tool. That's why our target users are the stakeholders rather than the first responders. So it's a strategic tool for being better prepared and understand better what to do in peacetime, but it will also be used at wartime to understand the behavior of the community. So in principle, as was already mentioned, our users are let's say the local authorities are the primary users, those who need the tool to improve resilience in their community. We call them generically stakeholders, but they could be different. They could be a mayor of a city, it could be a leader of a community. Whoever this person would be is the person who has the ability to take decisions and the responsibility to implement them. And for doing that, he or she has to have a good knowledge and understanding of what's going on. Typically, we try to help to ease the task of those who have a limited amount of resources available and have to take decisions on how to use them to improve resilience, which is not a very easy task, as you may imagine. Secondary users, so they are not out of the picture, are the practitioners, I mean the responders and emergency services. Definitely they are part of the response part, but also the planning. Practitioners are key to understand the risks, to understand the exposed value and the vulnerabilities, so they definitely are in the system because they will feed the system with information, especially with the lessons learned in the many scenarios they have been working in the past. They will also get some information because they know what the system expects the community to do in case of emergency. So this is not just a side role what they have. The beneficiaries from the RESILOC definitely are the citizens. So this is not about making a politician a better politician. It's not that. It's about making a community safer and more trustworthy in that sense, but able to resist. So in a sense, they benefit from all this kind of actions that the stakeholders will take, and we wish to be the tool that stakeholders will use to understand better and to take better decisions for their community. So in principle, this is how we see it. The local community where we work is made of two different parts. Let's say the local authority, which is basically policymakers, as I said, and the expert, call them technical services, which is basically the expert in resilience, and the local communities, the society, or whatever you want to define it, and the first responders, which are basically closer to the community than the politician in a sense. The circle around with the with the acronym ALRT is what we have identified in the consortium as a way of connecting these elements. ALRT stands for Local Resilience Teams. So there's a group of people from the society that are identified because they can actually be the real connection, the real bridge between the authorities and the community. So they are basically important people or relevant people because they have followers, because they have people who can listen to them, because they can represent the needs of a group of citizens, whatever. They are those who connect the authority to the communities, and they are really important for us, the project, because we cannot talk to everybody in a community. We have to select representative of the community, and the LRTs are crucial. And we have been establishing LRTs in all of our pilots. The 5 areas that Karsten mentioned at the beginning is where we have our LRTs, and we are working with them to continuously challenge what the researchers are doing and what the developers will be developing, to check if what we're doing will be useful, understood, and representative of their needs. In principle, we want to enlarge our base, so it is not only the 5 communities we have in the project. We have to look out of the project. So in principle, we expect to have in the future more connections, which goes from the policymakers at European or national level, the European Sea Protection Mechanism, NGOs, whoever are around, but also new communities. In principle, we would like to multiply the participation of communities. And since we are in an international conference here, of course, I launched already the call for those who want to be part of the group of communities who want to at least be informed of what we do, and in principle, stay abreast of what we do, and be even invited in the future to our exercises to see what we have implemented. You'll be very welcome if you do that. Let's move to the real applications, the time factor. So far we have been talking about, let's say, collecting data, analyzing, taking actions is a different thing. Action is something that moves a community from a snapshot to another. I have a snapshot today, I have a snapshot tomorrow. If they are different, some actions have been taken. Something happened in between. So an action, it's something that happens. It could be the disaster itself. Unfortunately, it is an action. It could be the action decided and implemented by the community to have an effect. Whatever it is, an action is something that allows the community to evolve in a way. So the actions connect the snapshot. I guess the slides will be available, so I will not stay on the text one by one. So whoever is more interested, they can read about what I write here in the future. But in principle, all the actions connecting the scenarios connecting the snapshot, create a scenario. A scenario is an evolution of a timeline. So I have my community today, I take actions, it moves somewhere else, and so on and so on and so forth. And I have a story of my community, even a simulated story, which is very important. I can create simulated scenarios. So what if I implement this action, what I would expect from the resilience in my community? What if I launch an awareness campaign on a specific risk? I would expect my people to be more prepared. I would expect my people to react better in case of a disaster. I would expect to be more resilient. I can play a number of these scenarios. Then something will happen, and I will have a way to measure if what I expected actually happened, and to see how good I was in planning, or how good I was in identifying the critical factors for improving resilience in a community. The control is not actually a real control in the sense of I can drive resilience, but I can try to steer resilience in a direction or the other. And basically, it's a matter of choices. It is not what RESILOC will do. We will not choose what to do. But in a community with a limited amount of resources, you have to decide if you want to be more resilient against risk A or risk B. It's the role of stakeholders and decision makers to do it. We want to give them a tool to analyze what could be the impact of their decisions. To do it, again, do you imagine as a decision maker to think about 200, 300 indicators and how they are connected? Almost impossible. Let's go to the dimensions that we identified. These dimensions is very much what we tried to synthesize as the main factors somebody should think of during the preparation for an emergency. So we thought about the resources clearly. Clearly, the more resources you have available and therefore prepared to act, the better it is. The environment is not a judgment, how good or how bad. Environment, you got it. You are born there, you live in a community, you cannot change it completely. So you know what are the physical features. And somehow you know the vulnerabilities, but then you can do something if you know the vulnerabilities. Infrastructures, okay? Roads, energy, water ducts, whatever is part of your infrastructures make your community alive. This is linked to the robustness of your community. If you have backup solutions, you are more robust and in a sense more resilient against some disasters. Communication, which is sort of a new dimension that we are still discussing about. It is the ability to reach out to people. And believe me, it's not just the ability to have internet or a TV channel. It's the ability to reach out in the sense to be understood. It's the way you communicate and the ability that people will understand the message. It's not that easy, I can tell you. The community itself, we refer to this also as life world, as Joe did. So basically is the community. It's linked to the behavior of the community. Let's call it perception, but it's not only perception. Whatever is around the community and make it a live group of people living together. The economy, fairly objective, real. Some of the events that happen disrupt the economy, and to have a good community, you have the economy to restart, which is not just saving lives directly, but it saves lives and quality of life in the longer term. So the time to restart is crucial. And last but not least, the governance. And again, it touches on leadership, trust, and planning. The ability of those who are in charge for leading the community to do it and to be followed by the citizens. This is, again, very crucial. All these dimensions can be assessed with our system. And this is what we want to provide the decision maker with. A simple representation of how good they are. It's not about being 3.5 or 3.6 on a dimension. It's about being good, relatively good, or be able to improve. It is not a scale 0 to 10. If you have 10, you cannot improve. You can always improve. It's just I cannot say, if you have the direction of improvement or not. That's crucial for us. And if I come back to the original picture, the big one, I will not go into details, and I take out the real world, and I try to synthesize what kind of tools we have to develop. These are the tools we are going to develop and to give the community. We have something, they will access to the platform, okay, which means the inventory, all the grinding machines, all the things, the presentation of the dimension assessment. This is a huge IT platform. Basically, it is software, it's a database, it's a lot of, let's say, algorithms to come from reality to dimensions. The second part is the app. It may look trivial. There are many apps for communicating with citizens, but we want to do more. We want to be in touch with citizens for the resilience. So the challenge for us is not to create an app, is to have the app used and useful. It is a challenge, and we have to discuss with the alertees exactly how to make this app useful and used. Third, sensors. It is connected to the fourth part, which is existing systems. We don't want to create new sensors. Nevertheless, we want to, let's say, benefit from the new existing technologies for location, from sensors or whatever. So there is a part of the new sensor technology which will be implemented and deployed in the system. But in principle, we would like to investigate what new sensors could be used for resilience. It's not about temperature sensors, I can tell you. Of course, there are many. It's not the water level in the river. There are many. But there are other kind of sensors, something like how many people are gathering in a specific place, if that place is the supposed to be place, the safety place or not, if there are some paths that have been used by citizens to get there, which have been too many dangerous or not. There are some new threats that we want to check. Some sensors that could be used to understand better the behavior of a community. All this is the package, let's say, we are going to do. So if we have the package, so let's jump to the end of the project. We have been very successful. Everything is in place. Great. We are very good. So you have your expert now in your community, which is able to go at work. It's a normal day, so nothing going on. He or she goes and is assigned a task. You have to assess the resilience of a community against a specific hazard, you name it. I don't want to specify. So there's a scenario. Somebody wrote, let's say, the script of the scenario. This is going to happen, this, and this, and this. It's well defined. So the expert goes on the RESILOC page, open a project, and checks how many data are available for that. Some of them are available because already collected. Some of them have to be used connecting to other providers. It could be the cadastral data, it could be meteorological data, whatever. Some have to be derived from other sets. For example, if I need a specific datum for my community, which is a local community, but I only have the data for the region, I can make something with them anyway and derive them from other sets. Or some of them are simply not available. I have to start a survey. It could be questionnaires, could be interviews, whatever it can be, but I need something. So this expert launches all the needed tasks. Okay, time goes on. Let's say another normal day at work. I've collected all the data in the inventory, so I have this nice database well fitted with data. And I have to connect them. And I have to assign them a weight, how much important it is for my community and for this specific hazard. I can start working on this machine, say, okay, this is more relevant, less relevant, and I feed my, I always use the phrase, the number, let's say, working machine, say I will crunching machine, and I'll create eventually, at the end of the day, my picture, my snapshot in the 7 dimensions. I have it, I look at it, I like it, and I share with my team. So this is the analysis that I developed. This is what I have. You know what? I know that I'm very weak on this purple part here, or this red part here. It's what is this? This is communication. Oh, too bad. We have to improve on it. It's not that I'm happy with this blue cone because they are very strong. It's not enough. It could be that I can improve also that. But this is very weak. Why is that? Let me dive into the numbers. What is missing here? Do I miss communication channels? Do I miss a communication officer? Do I miss the ability to understand what my citizens want? Do I miss part of the population because they don't use social media and I don't have radio channels? Am I too bad in languages because my community uses 2 languages and I use only one for official communication? Whatever is the reason, I can work on it. Let's try and make simulations. What if I improve this? What if I improve that? I can relaunch another assessment back with different weight or even with different data, whatever is needed. And I create different snapshots. And then my decision maker will say, you know what? If you want to improve on this, please take an action here. Then RESILOC has completed his task. Somebody else will put the money and take the actions. But for us, we have perfectly given the stakeholders the picture of their community, say this is where you should work. Do not relax on the blue area, no, but please take care of the purple and red areas because you are weak compared to the others. Now we go to an emergency day at work. Okay, something is happening. So I cannot run a program for resilience. Resilience is not hour by hour. It's a long process. So I'm not supposed to run again a simulation. It would tell anything to me. The situation is too dynamic. I cannot do it. What I can do is to activate all the channel for recording what's going on, because I need to understand what's going on and to enrich my understanding. So I will definitely access RESILOC again. I open my project and I connect all the physical sensors that are there. All the physical sensors have to be connected, and it is very likely a software action. I have to launch the app in a way and inform the citizens and start recording. The system will do it. I will record whatever is going on, and I will feed again my inventory with real data that are dynamic, not used yet. They are there. The next time I have to revise my assessment of resilience, I can run it on real data because now I have the data and I can check if my community behaved as expected. So once the emergency has gone, because again, RESILOC will not solve it, will help but not solve it, I will have a sort of a follow-up day at work. Okay, let's come together. We somehow resisted or passed this challenge. What went right, what went wrong? And we have now this ability to collect and see other snapshots. So we expected to have this result, and we had the other one. We didn't expect this, and we had this improvement, and we can better understand the dynamics between the different dimensions and the different indicators. And eventually start again another survey with citizens, asking, questioning, connecting, just to improve my understanding and be better prepared for the next time. Hopefully not for the big one, but for the next time. So and again, but everything is stored, it stays there. I build the history of my community. And this history and the lessons that I learned can be shared because they're objective. They are structured in the same way for everybody. So if I have a neighbor community that doesn't have RESILOC at hand, but would like to see how it was useful, it can be shown objectively, not with some good presenter presenting some slides. It's just to show it how it worked. I could work in another community. I could be extended somebody else. Okay, I conclude my presentation with again over the same slide. As to say, remember, this is a complete flow of information from the community through our platform to the stakeholders and back. Actions from the stakeholders to the community. If we are able to start this loop, we will feed it and will improve the ability for the platform to identify these dimensions and to see how much effective it is our way of representing resilience and how much good is for the stakeholder to take decisions. Good, this is my last slide. I hope I was roughly on time, a little bit more over the time, but I think I covered most of the topics that are related what RESILOC is currently planning and implementing in the project. So again, Yordan, thank you for the attention of those who resisted, and the floor is back to you.
Thank you, Uberto. No one can can explain better than you the ultimate vision of RESILOC, what exactly we will have at the end of the day. So now I think that we have all the information we need in order to have a very fruitful discussion in the next 2 sessions. We are just 10 minutes behind the time, so I think we still have time for good discussions. Now I will give the floor to Ramona, who will chair the session, the question and answer sessions. We will start with the questions which were posted in the YouTube stream. And of course, each question usually is followed by another question. So I guess there will be a lot of food to discuss. Okay,
Indeed.
it's your turn.
Thank you so much, Yordan. And I would like to thank very much our colleagues, Karsten, Joe, and Uberto. They did an amazing job, in my view, in presenting our team's effort for the past year in trying to understand resilience for the purpose of hopefully contributing to strengthen somehow the resilience framework of European communities and societies indeed. Now, my role here was to collect some of the inputs that came during the very fruitful presentations. We are not a huge bunch, but we are quite an active and a resilient bunch, I think, because many questions arrived on very different channels, some of them directly on the YouTube platform, some of them separately in different chat rooms. So I try to cluster these questions, as you can see with this little mind map. I think that we or our colleagues managed to raise the interest of our audience on very important issues of our project. We started today's presentation on RESILOC saying RESILOC is a European project, and indeed it is a European project, and we are not referring only to the EU-funded program project, but it intends to achieve a European dimension, if you want. So a lot of questions arrived on the extent to which RESILOC intends to encompass the European dimension, and which links as well with the diversity that represents, of course, our European society. We had a lot of questions about the actors. We will see some questions regarding communities and behavior. A lot of interest, Uberto, was raised by your session. I could see around the idea of the assessment of resilience, and specifically the tools we are envisaging to implement for assessing resilience. We have some inputs on communication, and last but not least, we would see some questions referring to the ultimate goals and impacts of our project. Now, I will try to scroll down the questions, and I'll do my best to direct these questions to my colleagues. All of them are more than capable to answer them. So for now, I think I will leave Uberto to breathe for at least 5 minutes, because he had two intensive sessions. So I will try to present to you some of the questions related to the European dimension and the diversity of our European scenario, which I think they quite link quite well. One question arrived saying, how do you ensure that results of the RESILOC tools are representative from a European perspective? Karsten, would you like to share with us some inputs? I singled you out as a potential recipient of this question. So maybe if you'd like to give us a few details on how our tools intend to be or not representative at European level. Karsten?
Oh, okay. So I think unmuting would be helpful, wouldn't it? Yes. So maybe I cling on something that Uberto mentioned towards the end of his presentation, with clearly stating that there's no such thing as a single European approach on resilience, and there will not be, because diversity is too rich. However, there's things you can do to improve the representativeness on the European perspective, which is exactly what we are asked to do as well from the European Commission. So I think there's three aspects that we have to consider here. For once, bear in mind that the tools are operating to assess resilience on a scenario-specific approach. So it's basically the scenarios that you're looking at. So consider the tool as a wagon, like as to transport something. What will be in it basically is really up to the community itself. So always part of the tool will be built on what the community perceives as a relevant scenario. I think another thing which needs to be highlighted, yes, it is important to improve the response and the preparedness of communities, and within it we see developments where the disaster risk reduction and emergency managers that unify approaches. So they are not so very different across Europe, having the union civil protection mechanism, for instance. All these instruments are there to standardize. However, looking at the societal aspects, particularly what Joe referred to, we have a strong focus on the local communities as well, and this is actually what changes across Europe, the behavior of the people. So looking into that will increase the representativeness quite a lot. And then I'd like to stress that during the research phase, we had our colleagues from the Resilience Advisors Networks stretching about the concept of resilience, not only in Europe, but across sort of globally, looking into the concepts. And finally, also the Tavistock Institute doing a survey on the behavioral aspects, which was designed to touch many countries in Europe rather than just the validation areas. So yes, I think with those 3 points, we take a fair chance of increasing the representativeness of the tools and the results from the RESILOC project.
Thank you very much, Karsten. Staying a bit on the topic of diversity and the European dimension, many inputs came on this. Of course, we are aware that communities are quite diverse across Europe. There are big differences which are go beyond the cultural aspects. They might refer indeed to urban versus rural settings, dimensions, the technology uptake at community level, so on and so forth. So what are possible limitations that you see there in applying the RESILOC tools? Maybe Joe could give us a perspective, limitations given by the diversity. So we saw Karsten was quite optimistic about making it all happen, linking it all together, trying to standardize. There is indeed a European effort in standardizing different response mechanisms to disaster and so on and so forth. As a researcher, Joe, how do you see the challenge of diversity of the communities we are dealing with within our project and at European level?
So I'm slightly more pessimistic, or slightly less optimistic than Karsten. It's we've known for a long time, looking in resilience studies and in the literature, and across a whole spectrum of situations where ICTs are used, that there's a question of digital inclusion, at least, and we know that, and coronavirus has also accentuated this and highlighted this. We know that certain groups are less likely to be engaged in the kinds of processes and the use of tools that we're trying to do in RESILOC. So, for example, older people, there is a gender dimension, and there's there are issues around economic position and so on. So for me, the local resilience teams are crucial in delivering the diversity aspect of the project. And they need to reflect, again, what I call the life world. They need to give a voice to groups in communities that normally don't have a voice, the less powerful. I think the LRTs are the crucial bridge between the system and how it manages disasters and emergencies and the people on the ground. And I illustrate in the case of the Grenfell Tower fire, if that bridge is gone, it doesn't work anymore, it's collapsed, then you have catastrophic consequences. So for me, the key test of whether the tools can reflect the diversity of communities will be to make sure that they engage the spectrum of perspectives and voices within the LRTs.
Thank you so much, Joe. Let's see, Uberto, did you have the time to recover a bit after the long speech?
I'm resilient.
Yeah, I know you are, but our audience might not know. So, yes, indeed, Uberto, as the whole group, is a resilient one. So, Uberto, why am I saying this? We have raised, rightfully so, and I guess we are all very happy, a lot of interest with the proposed RESILOC tools we just presented. So I will maybe direct some of these questions to you, and then of course, if our colleagues would like to add anything on top on that, they are more than welcome. I guess I will start a bit randomly. So for instance, the tool raised awareness, raised an interest for what concerns its potential uptake at local level across this very diversified local context, right? So do you think that local actors can easily adopt the proposed technologies? This was one of the questions which I think could be quite interesting to start with, the reasoning around the tool. How do you see our local actors? Are they ready to step in?
Well, it cannot be denied that one of the preconditions of RESILOC is to have a good understanding of the community in objective terms. So what I presented as need of data coming from the area. I don't want to discourage anybody, but of course, during our first part of study, we came up with quite a huge number of indicators and proxies. But it's not about the number, it is about the availability of those data. And in many cases, they are always available, but sometimes you need to do something. But it is impossible to achieve anything without some work. For example, if I have to understand the distribution of the age of the population across your community, I mean, I would expect that it is available. Maybe it is not, or maybe since they are normally grouped, the grouping of ages is not exactly as the system would like to receive. It goes the same for the education, for the health, for the salaries or whatever. There are so many indicators that are useful. So there is some work to do in all communities. What we try to include in this is the ability to derive your data from others' data. What I mean is that, as I said in my presentation, if you don't have at hand your own data, but they have your data for the nation or the region, we may derive it. It will be flagged as less, let's say, accurate. Or maybe you have your data from 10 years ago, which may be not the same that today. So we have a way of including in the picture the accuracy of the data you make available. But it cannot be denied that there is some work to be done. How much? it depends on the community, but it also depends on the number of kind of scenarios you want to use in your assessments. Basically, if I don't want to go too far, but if you don't know your community, it will be hard to be resilient. So some work is anyway good if you have to do it. Don't ask me about the money to do it. This is another story.
Okay, I won't ask you about the money. It's not our business yet to discuss about that. But I will ask you about maybe the know-how that communities, in terms of, well, the actors, the operators, whoever is going to, and this is another question on our list, who is going to play with this amazing tool? And what kind of capacity, skills, know-how should this operator, expert, as you defined it, should have in order to go and play for the sake and the better good of the entire community?
It is at least two different kind of skills. One is typically software skills. There is somebody who has to be able to work well with computers. Nowadays, it shouldn't be that difficult, but anyway, you have to manage input of data, understanding of data, outputs on maps or whatever. So some basic computer skills are needed. But in principle, you have to understand what resilience is. And this is quite a complex feat that you should have. So typically, this expert is somebody who knows, when we talk about resilience, what we mean with that. I can make a comparison with the expert in seal protection. Seal protection nowadays is something that we always refer to, but 50 years ago, it was not there. So seal protection has not always existed. We had firefighters, we had police, but seal protection is a different thing. It's planning ahead of the disaster. And resilience is sort of planning wider than seal protection. So you need some expertise. In a sense, it is sort of a call, not for the communities in general, a call for training expert in resilience, because it is a different language than seal protection. In our experience with local communities, those who are expert in seal protection are always good enough to start working on resilience, because many of the concepts are similar. So if you have somebody which is expert in seal protection and knows your community and knows how to use a computer, well, you already have a good candidate for using the system.
Great. So it is a user-friendly kind of a tool, if I understand correctly.
Oh, yes, it has to be that.
Yes.
It has to be. Not yet. We are still working on the project. No, nowadays, it would be scared about what it looks like, but it has to be a user-friendly tool.
That's the intention. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, Uberto, I don't want this to seem like an FBI moment where you are getting interrogated. But as I said, the assessment and the tool part was quite important for our audience. And our audience would like to know more about how, I mean, you shared very, very nicely the idea of a work day for the expert implementing these tools. But maybe we could go and give some more examples, so to support our audience to imagine this work day better. So some of the questions, they refer to how does this work in practice, and are there, can you give us an example for a hazard in specific? Yes, I think, and also there were some questions related to the when. I am sure you already responded to these questions in your presentations towards the end, but you mentioned about the fact that these tools will be applicable both in peacetime and in wartime. So I guess that in peacetime, just rephrasing what you said, the tool is an amazing companion and friend that supports the preparedness process and hopefully builds and strengthens the already existing strategies at local level. What happens in a wartime? Is it only a data collection, or does it help you to do something else? Wartime, given the emergency, the response phase, of course.
This is a very important question that we had ourselves in the project. what to do during the response time, because we always wanted to do something also on that phase. But in principle, if you think about, again, it's hard to make a comparison. Resilience is not something that happens in minutes. An earthquake happens in minutes. So it's hard to find a response in being more resilient. Resilience means that you are able to be better prepared, you're able to withstand the immediate, so the response, and then you are very good at recovering in many different areas. It's not about only looking for survivors after an earthquake. It's also about having small businesses restarting, or having let's say a secondary bridge deployed so that you can still run the hospital with the goods that they need, and so it's a complex things. In my opinion, during the response time, we surely will capture data. This is clearly there. That is also one thing that I hope, but it has to be tested in our exercises. Since we run the scenario and the simulations, we would expect something to happen. And these expectations may help in identifying the best way of communicating with the citizens. So I think that what we can do better with RESILOC is to somehow support the communication to citizens during the emergency. I don't think we will be able to tell any firefighters go there and look for people there, or go there and find the people that have survived the flood or whatever. Now, this is not what we are going to do with RESILOC, but we are going to tell them, you know what, in this specific situation, there will be a lot of people suffering from this, or they will not be able to do this. So be prepared. Again, locally prepared to do that. So that's the expectation I have in wartime. About the use in everyday. So I was asked to say, give an example. Okay, I can try to give an example for something that unfortunately I experienced a few times, which is an earthquake. So I know that earthquakes happens regularly in Italy where I live. So they will happen anyway. So I have a sort of a probability, which is the hazard of an earthquake of this magnitude in a place. Okay, I don't want to jinx any community. I will name any city, but let's say that we have an earthquake magnitude 5.3, which is huge. I know that community as vulnerable because it is an old village. It's made by old houses, so a lot of them will collapse. Okay, what can I do to improve it? Okay, of course, I can replace all the old buildings with new ones. Oh, forget about it. I cannot rebuild the city. What can I do better? Okay, I can prepare the population. Yes, that I can do. And so I can check. I start describing the scenario. Okay, scenario is this magnitude, this time of the day, this time of the year, just to make an example. With that, I expect to know how many people is living there, how many people is working there, what kind of distribution of population I have. All data should be already in. What is the extent on the impact? I have the emergency plans that have been already prepared by the civil protection, so I know what they expect to do in case of a large disaster. I know the area that will potentially be affected. And I start to say, okay, what I need more. I know more or less the situation about the railroads or roads or whatever the infrastructure are available. I know how many will be damaged by this kind of earthquake because I have the plans. If I don't have the plans, then I have to know if I want to run the scenario. This is a kind of example of thing that you have to know. You have to call your water company to say, what happens if I have the earthquake? On average, I don't want to have a precise answer, but if I have 5.3, will water still run in my pipes or not? Will energy be restored after 1 hour, 2 hours, 2 days, 1 week, 1 month? What are your expectations? Clearly, it's an assessment. It's not guaranteed, but I have to know it. Then I have all together there. And I must say, okay, I know this. What is more relevant for me in case of an earthquake? Is that relevant if people is well educated? Well, no, it doesn't change a lot. it is important to know how much people is aware of the risk of an earthquake. Yes, very much. So this is a higher weight. Do I know how much my citizens are aware of the risk of an earthquake, 5.3, blah, blah, blah? Yes, because I ran already an exercise because we are in an area which is prone to earthquakes. No, we never did that. Okay, we never did that. We have to run immediately a campaign with all our citizens. So immediately action here, because I have a zero here. So definitely preparedness is very low. People do not know what to do in case of an earthquake. Okay, simple examples. When I have all this together, I launch my machine. I say, okay, let's tell me how we are along the dimensions. And I will put emphasis in this case, not on prevention. I cannot prevent an earthquake to happen. I will prefer to have emphasis on the vulnerabilities and on the running of businesses, for example, because I want to know if my community will restart being operative in a week, in a year, with a earthquake magnitude 5. I run it. It crunches the data and it gives me these 7 things. Okay, the dimension. I say, okay, I expected that we are very weak on communication. I expect they are pretty weak on infrastructures, unfortunately. So I have to take actions here. How can I improve this? So I will call my energy supplier and say, you know what? I noticed that you yourself are saying that it's not enough because you will restore energy after a month. I'm sorry, you have to launch another program to make it 1 week, not 1 month. Communication managers, antennas for mobile phones, are they be working? No, why not? Yeah, and you start to identify actions, and you can start. Let's assume that I'm able to do it. Will I improve on resilience? Okay, naturally you would say yes. With our tool, you can say a sort of qualitative yes is better than just a gut yes. Yes, I will improve it definitely. And you will start working on this and seeing how the dimension will move around. Then it will come out short of money. I either launch action A or action B. And you will try to see with action A, I improve here. With action B, I improve there. What is the impact? Then you need, again, the experts. We will not count the victims. We are not there. Sea protection will. But I can tell you, if you don't do that, your economy will restart after 6 months or will restart after 1 month. It's you, if you want to give priority to the economy or something else. And I didn't mention the COVID-19 situation on purpose because we are living that. And actually, the safety of people and the economy running is exactly the fight we have now. People who want to have the economy running in spite of safety of people, and the opposite. Both of them are relevant. There's nobody who is right, who is wrong. Both the elements have to be considered. Okay, so it's just I went a little bit more in detail of what I said, not that much because I don't have the tool in front of me, but I expect to give it. Now, I really expect to have in our trials in let's say 1.5 years from now, pretty advanced to show it, and again to invite those who want to be part of it as observers or just to get the reports. In the end, we are very happy to share the results because this project is for Europe, it's not for only us.
Indeed. Uberto, I think your answers covered a wide range of questions we received, talking about the fact that we don't have yet the tool tangible in front of us. I just wanted to put this to your attention. I'm sure you already know that in some cultures, a child is considered to be born in the moment in which his parents or her parents are thinking of the idea of a child. So I'm sure that our RESILOC tool child, it is there, it is tangible because we are seeing it, we have a clear vision, we have a clear picture of it, and we are now trying to put it together and make it even more tangible and let's put it like this, make it a real baby, not only a conceptual baby. I hope this joke was not too much, but I think it gives a good idea of how we perceive the tool and the efforts, the energy, the enthusiasm we are putting in the project and in its tools. Uberto, yes or no questions. few of them remaining on the tools and assessment, and then I will have a question for Joe. Yes or no question, are these tools adequate for all types of hazard?
90% yes. For some hazards, I mean, it's not very good for terrorist attacks, if you want to consider them hazards.
Okay.
Because we cannot plan for the impossible to understand. Nobody could plan for the Twin Towers. That's what I mean. But we can plan for a collapse of a building. So one important thing is that as a project, we consider the consequences of an event rather than only the causes of the event. So yes, not completely. You cannot map everything, but almost everything, yes.
Almost everything. This is a very good answer. Almost everything is most what we can aspire in life, I guess. Another yes or no question. Do you integrate crowdsourcing in your data analytics?
Yes, we do.
So is this real-time data or is it history-based data? Our audience is interesting to know.
For the time being, will be real-time data.
Okay, good.
And then it will become historical in a sense. But yes, we still have to implement the way we want, and then we will become historical at a later stage.
Great. Thank you, Uberto. And I will leave you to breathe for just a moment. And if I have Joe there with us still, I hope, because I cannot see the participants, I would like to ask him, how do you intend to analyze the emotions or the sentiments at community level? Because I guess this was raised during Joe's presentation around community and community behavior, if I'm not mistaken.
Sentiment is really hard to capture. You can do it the traditional ways, doing it by asking people what they feel like. We know that social media is a really good tool and device and medium for capturing the sentiment of particular sections of a community in a hazard situation. We know we've analyzed it before. We can get lots of big data through social media. It can tell us things like where the anxieties about a disaster situation, an emergency situation, focused and concentrated. Do we need to then direct our communication focus to those hotspots, if you like, where anxiety is? It can tell us, whether people are spreading malicious, false, fake news, stuff around an emergency. So social media is a really good way of capturing and analysing and acting on sentiment. The broader picture is we need to understand how the community feels over the longer term. Uberto has quite rightly been pointing out that the extent to which you can dynamically respond to situations depends on the type of emergency. And because the whole thing is dynamic, because nothing is fixed and static, we need to understand a community's status, if you like, on resilience at different points of times. We really need to have longitudinal ways of measuring sentiment over time. And to do that, you'd need to engage with the community. And again, to me, it's a question of having community, if you like, voices that you can tap into dynamically over a period to give you a good picture of how the community and different sections and subgroups of it is feeling at any one time.
Thank you very much, Joe. I think this connects very well the idea of the importance of social media in being able to analyze the sentiment of a community in face of a disaster. I think it also links with one of other questions that came across our channels related to communication. How much do you think social media are relevant for increasing resilience? So maybe very few words, Joe, the relation between, okay, we can use social media to analyze what's the sentiment of our community in disaster, when facing a disaster. Can we use that to increase, to strengthen the resilience at local level as well? Does it have any relevance there?
Social media?
Yeah.
Yes, in principle, for sure. But again, you know, it links to the question of diversity because, as we know, again, you know, social media doesn't have a uniform usage pattern. It reflects different societal groups. Older people tend to use it less. Young people use it more, but they have particular and very specific channels and platforms, you know, like Snapchat rather than Twitter. So in principle, I think it's a very useful tool. Has a lot of potential, but like everything, it needs to be tailored to the context in which we're trying to use it as a tool to get information in a particular emergency situation, and in the longer term, over time, to profile the resilience of particular communities.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Joe. So I think we are 5 minutes away from the end of this session, if I'm not mistaken. There are some questions left still. I will leave this to the chair to enlighten us on how we are going to reply to all of these amazing questions. I would think that they will be made public on our website. However, I would leave one question to the team, and then whoever wants to jump in to close it. I think we are a democratic bunch and a resilient bunch too. One question would be, how would you describe the dream impact of RESILOC for a community? What's the dream? Uberto.
I know you are.
I think you are the dreamer. You are the dreamer of us all.
Well, I actually for a community, the dream impact would be to see that some actions were implemented because identified by the analysis of resilience using our approach, and then this led to a tangible result. I wouldn't say saving lives, because it would be great, it would be amazing, but the point, it could also be just having the economy restarted a week before would be also very good, because again, resilience is not only saving lives, which is relevant, it's also keeping the quality of life higher. So if we have a community which is able to withstand as they are good, to respond because they are prepared, and then to restart and come back to normal operations in a shorter time, and even getting better than before, that will be a great result. This is the dream of any expert in resilience, and we hope that RESILOC could give a hand, not solve it, give a hand, yes. Ultimately, if I look at European level, I would dream that this approach would eventually be embraced by other communities than ours, and then become a sort of a way for having resilience understood and analyzed everywhere across Europe. Not to compare, to improve, to learn from the lessons from others, because you have the same way of analyzing the answers and the solutions implemented anywhere, so that you can choose them. Okay, they did good. Can we do the same? I run a simulation. I see that it would work also for me. I do it, and I have a positive impact. That would be clearly the dream for all of us.
Indeed. I adhere to that dream. Thank you very much, Uberto. Thank everybody. I will leave the floor open to the chair to close the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramona. You are brilliant with juggling with all these questions. So I'll just try to close the workshop. I hope we managed to present our insights on resilience among communities, and we convinced the audience that our tools, our approach can strengthen communities' abilities to resist, to absorb, and to accommodate to different hazards. We from RESILOC team, from RESILOC partnership, will be available to communicate with everyone who wants to get more information or just to cooperate on the topics of community resilience. As Ramona said, we will reply officially to all questions arrived from the audience, and we can post them on our website. And again, I would like to thank first all our speakers, Karsten, Joe, Uberto, and Ramona, and also to our hosts from ENVIRORISK to being so kind, having us in their conference. I wish them success and many more ENVIRORISK conferences in the future. And hopefully RESILOC could be again part of the next ENVIRORISK conferences. Thank you to everyone, thank you to the participants and to all questions they put it, and all of them will, how to say, help us to improve our insights and our ideas how to make RESILOC successful project. Thank you very much.
Thank you.